In today's video, we have all the latest NHL trade and free agent rumors from around the NHL. We're looking at teams like the Montreal Canadiens, Calgary Flames, Minnesota Wild, and Arizona Coyotes. And we also have some big news regarding the 2021 NHL Winter Classic and All-Star Game. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about today. Let's kick things off with the news that just came out recently here from the NHL, talking about the Winter Classic and All-Star Game, which has officially now been postponed. Now, not a huge shocker here. Of course, we knew that having a Winter Classic tentatively booked for January the 1st was going to be an issue, obviously, given the fact that NHL may not even be starting up until January. It could even be a little bit more than January 1st before the puck officially drops on its first scheduled game. I guess we'll have to remain to be seen. I know at this point, the NHL indicates it's still targeting a January 1st return, but given everything going on with the pandemic, it's pretty much going to be impossible to have that game planned and you'll be able to have a large, massive group in attendance in that regard. So makes only good sense here to postpone it. They've certainly assured fans of the Minnesota Wild who were scheduled to host that they will still get a Winter Classic here very soon, more than likely the year after, hopefully 2022. Everything is back to normal and we can have a normal, normal year with normal fans in attendance all season and everything like that. So we'll have to wait to be seen. But of course, that's the tentative hopes at least. So the Minnesota Wild St. Louis Blues game will take place at some point, likely 2022. As far as the All-Star game that was supposed to be hosted by the Florida Panthers, that as well has been postponed. Likely, I would imagine, with a condensed work schedule, they probably won't have an All-Star game for the coming season. My guess is that how it's going to work when the season starts, and it only makes sense to postpone these events because obviously not only are they fun events, but they're events that drive a lot of revenue, and they're not going to want to miss out. Like, that's not the type of thing you're going to have without fans in attendance. I would suggest that we more likely are, hopefully at least, going to have the start of the season in January. Good chance they start with no fans in pretty much all or most cities. And then by the time we hit like March, I think they're hoping to have limited capacity and then kind of build it up as we go. And with the hopes that by the time we get to like a playoff season, maybe they'll be at full capacity or at least close enough that they'll be making enough revenue that it will kind of make up for it and make it worthwhile. I think that's at least what they're hoping for, with a gradual return, gradual build up throughout the coming season of how many fans can be in attendance. So we'll have to wait to be seen. But those events for right now are officially postponed. Now, we also saw another signing since our last video where we put out the one about the Jake Virtanen signing. Of course, we had Connor Brown sign earlier today. And now we have Dallas Stars forward Denis Gurianov, who had himself quite a playoff season. A bit of a coming out party for sure on a national stage, getting more attention, showing just how good he can be. He signs an identical contract to Jake Virtanen. The restricted free agent forward signs a 2-year deal with an average annual value of $2.55 per season. So I think, again, that's a pretty fair contract for what Gurianov has achieved so far. I think he's got real high-end potential. And obviously in a couple of years' time, the NHL will hopefully be at a better financial spot where he can cash in a longer-term deal and get better money at that point, and still has a couple of years to continue developing here, because I think he's going to be a real solid player and a big part of Dallas's future. Of course, Dallas still has a couple more RFAs to look after here, including Rupe Hintz. It'll be interesting to see what kind of contract they work out for him. So that's the latest signing here as well since our last video. Now let's jump into the latest trade rumors around the NHL. Now, I want to start off with the Calgary Flames. I found some interesting information here, a new article and video put out by Eric Francis of Sportsnet, talking about the future of players like Johnny Gaudreau and David Rittich, or lack thereof, I should say. Eric Francis feels that there's a really high probability that both of those players will be moved sometime during the next year, or they're going to be at a high risk for the Flames to lose them via free agency if they're not traded somewhere down the line. When it comes to David Rittich, he's entering the final year of his contract. He would be a UFA after this coming season, making $2.75 million. Of course, with the signing of Jacob Markstrom, and it was a long-term deal, pretty much seals his fate that he's not really going to have an opportunity to be a starter, at least on a consistent basis, for 6 years, which puts him really late into his career. He's already a little bit older at age 29. So clearly that's not going to work for him. So I would imagine he's going to want to find another, better opportunity for himself after his contract is up. So the Flames really need him for the coming season. Obviously, they need him to be real solid, especially where they're likely going to, like I said, have a condensed work schedule. You're going to need goaltenders to be more of a tandem, even more than before, like we saw in this year's return to play. So I think the Flames are going to do their best to make use of him. Obviously, if the season goes sideways and it's looking like they may not be a playoff team, then I would suggest that Rittich would be a prime trade candidate at the deadline. But sometimes, trading goalies that late in the season can be tricky. Not necessarily that they would, certainly find a deal for him. But if he's having a good year, would have an opportunity. But if not, then Rittich, likely won't be with the team for too terribly long. Now, in the case of Johnny Gaudreau, obviously it's a whole different situation there, and he has an extra year in his contract compared to Rittich. But at this point, Eric Francis really believes that Gaudreau, if he's not traded before the end of that contract, that he will walk during free agency. He believes he does want to head back east where he's from and end up in a market somewhere closer to home, whether it be New Jersey, Philly, or any of those areas in the metropolitan area in the eastern coast of the United States would be his preferred place to play. So obviously that poses issues for the Calgary Flames. Now, we've had a lot of Johnny Gaudreau trade rumors in the past. Of course, at this point, he still has not been moved. Francis goes on to reiterate that his playoff performance has shown that Johnny Gaudreau is more of a passenger in the playoffs, and his style of play, that even though it leads to a lot of good stats and regular season goals and statistics, that it's not really all that solid a play in the playoffs. We've seen him basically disappear and get shut down and really be relatively ineffective. So Johnny Hockey is not that leading guy that can really drive your team to playoff success, even though he can help you win a lot of hockey games in the regular season. I think, like I've said about some other guys, it's not that they're not good hockey players. They're just not that true defined top leader. They're more of a second or third piece that can be complementary to a top leader. Like we've seen, for example, a Phil Kessel. He was looked upon as being the guy in Toronto, couldn't get it done, took a lot of heat, goes to Pittsburgh where he's probably the third best forward, suddenly finds a ton of success, 2-time Stanley Cup champion. Look at a guy like Taylor Hall. He's proven right now, to me at least, like I've said before, that he's not that top end material. I think he's more of a really good complementary piece. Now we'll see how he does in Buffalo, and obviously if he can combine to work with some other top players, then I think it could work out. Same goes for Gaudreau. We'll see what happens here. There are teams in the Eastern Conference, like the Devils or the Flyers, I think would probably be somewhat interested in acquiring a player like him, and we will see if the Flames desire to move him now or sometime soon anyway. At this point, I think it's probably pretty likely that we don't see a trade before the beginning of the next season, unless a team like the Flyers or somebody come to the Flames and really make them a phenomenal offer that they just can't refuse. Probably unlikely, but after this year, Gaudreau would still have 1 year left, and we will see at that point next offseason, or like I said, if the Flames don't have a good regular season, for example, and it's gone sideways and they're not going to make the playoffs, then I would think Gaudreau would be a prime deadline acquisition at that point, if not the next offseason, pretty much for sure. Now, I think the Flames kind of want to give this one more kick at the camp with this current group of core players as well, so we'll see how they do for the coming year, but based on what we saw in the return to play, what we're likely going to get in the next season is not exactly what you'd call normal hockey under normal circumstances with a normal schedule. So it's difficult to really truly evaluate what you have there. I know there was even some debate if you take away Johnny Gaudreau, what's that going to make of Sean Monahan? And at the end of the day, some feel that Monahan wouldn't be the offensive kind of player he was without having a playmaking winger like Gaudreau play on his side. But you know what? It really boils down to who you bring in to replace Johnny Gaudreau. The Flames are not going to trade him without bringing back a pretty good offensive weapon to replace him or to go through free agency or what have you. So we'll see what happens. But according to Eric Francis, pretty good chance that Johnny Gaudreau does not finish that contract in Calgary. And even though it hasn't happened yet, sometime between now and next offseason, almost a guarantee that Gaudreau and Rittich are no longer members of the Calgary Flames. Now, as I mentioned as well, I want to take a look at some other teams. Let's jump over now to the Montreal Canadiens. I know yesterday we touched on the future of Philip Danualt, and I want to touch a little bit further on that here today. Another article from the Montreal Gazette written by Stu Cowan talking about the same idea we talked about yesterday about what's it going to take to get Philip Danualt under contract. The Habs obviously added a fair bit during this offseason, making their cap situation much, much tighter, and obviously heading into next year when Danualt is going to be a potential UFA, You have to wonder, can they afford to keep him at this point? And then you also have the argument of, can you afford to not keep him? Because he's been so valuable in a lot of ways that often go underrated or underappreciated with this franchise. Now, one thing to keep in mind as well is the history here between Philip Danualt and general manager Marc Bergevin. Now, in case you're not aware, Bergevin, before he got into the GM role with the Montreal Canadiens, worked with the Chicago Blackhawks as an assistant GM under Stan Bowman for a while, and he was highly responsible for the Blackhawks drafting Philip Danualt. He had scouted him quite a bit, and obviously was a big fan of his during his time with Junior, and helped bring him to the Chicago franchise while he was there. When the Chicago Blackhawks drafted Danualt, they had 2 first-round picks that year. He was taken in the late first round. Bergevin even wanted to take him with their higher first-round pick, but Bowman had other plans and decided to go a different route, which never worked out on the player that they selected either. So they very well could have gone with Danualt, but when he was still available, I believe it was number 26 overall, they agreed to take Philip Danualt, and they later found out as well that the team coming right after him, which was Tampa, would have selected him had they not taken him, so they wouldn't have had any more opportunities with any later picks to select him. So obviously he then traded for Danualt with the Blackhawks after he was in Montreal, and he got him for pretty much a steal of a deal as well. So considering how he ended up at Montreal, how the long history there with Bergevin and Danualt, you can't help but wonder if Bergevin is going to find a way to keep him and move out something else instead. Now, as far as what kind of contract is it going to take to keep Danualt in the fold, Stu Cowan projects a 6-year deal, probably somewhere between $5.5 million. If you take a look at what they just gave to Brendan Gallagher, it's probably not going to be quite that much, but Gallagher being the highest paid forward on the team, which was something that was part of the negotiation process with Gallagher and the Habs, Bergevin agreed to make him the highest paid forward, and he's likely going to remain that way for some time. So I don't see him getting paid more than Gallagher did. And at the same time, though, you have to wonder that he could make possibly a little bit more than a guy like Jonathan Drouin, or possibly even Josh Anderson, or somewhere comparable to those two players. So the Habs are going to have a tough situation. Next year, going into the offseason, they're going to have Philip Danualt, Joel Armia, as well as Tomas Tatar all be unrestricted free agents. And they're also going to have Kotkaniemi as well as Arturi Lehkonen be restricted free agents. And they're going to have very limited amount of cap space to get all those players in their contract. If they want to keep them all, it's likely not even going to be remotely possible. They're also going to have Victor Mente be an RFA yet again after signing a 1-year deal. So it's going to be tough. They're going to have some tough decisions to make. And if they're going to stand a chance to keep a guy like Danualt, we don't know yet exactly how they feel about Tatar longer term. It sounds like they're probably going to let this kind of year play out and see, for a while at least, how he's fitting in with the team. He very well could end up departing via free agency. It's hard to say. But at the same time, if you look around the roster, there's been rumors that they might move Paul Byron. That would free up some space. Depending on guys like Durant as well, he's been a bit of a lightning rod for criticism during his time in Montreal, but he has been better, I think, based on how he played last year before he was injured. I honestly think that there's still some value there as well. So I'm not sure what the Habs do, but you have to think that if they don't sign Danualt and he moves on and they trade him, there's going to be tons of interest. They will not have an issue trading him for sure, and they will get a decent return, probably in the form of future assets. But who is going to start playing his role and playing against the other team's top line? Yes, Kotkaniemi and Suzuki both showed in the playoffs that they're ready for a bigger role. They can be top 2 center icemen, but at the same time, they're not ready to be taking on those big assignments to shut down the other team's top lines and be more defensively responsible. They're starting to find their offensive game, and then you get the face-off side of it as well, where Danualt's also pretty good. So they're going to notice a major setback if they do not have him in their lineup. So they're really going to have to find a way to be creative here with the other members of their forward group to move out another piece to try to retain Danualt. Essentially here, like this article goes on to say, is yes, they're going to have a hard time affording him, but you could argue that they can't afford to lose him either, and they need to find a way. And given I know that Bergevin seemed to be how loyal he was to Brendan Gallagher and how he felt about him, I would assume he would feel similarly about a guy like Philip Danualt as well. And even though we heard Danualt's remarks in the media about being somewhat unhappy, I would hope to think that they can find a way to resolve that throughout the season here, show him what kind of role he can be given, and sell him on the idea of being a part of the Habs' future, because he really is all that valuable. So, like I said, there will not be any shortage of interest. If they get into the season here and they get into later into the year and he's still not signed, The rumor mill is going to keep churning. Bergevin is going to be getting lots of phone calls. But at the end of the day, I would say that there's a good possibility here that they find a way to keep him and trade out another piece instead. But let me know what your thoughts are on the future of Danualt. Does he stay? And what moves do they need to make that happen? Who else would you trade out of the forward group to free up the space to sign him? Because he's likely looking for at least a $5 million contract moving forward. Now, the latest updates as well, Minnesota Wild defenseman Matt Dumba. We haven't talked about Dumba in a while. There's been some recent articles discussing his future. I know Michael Russo of The Athletic has touched on some updates here recently, being asked through a mailbag article, and he basically indicates that at this point, GM Bill Guerin just hasn't found the right deal. That he's still very much available and could technically be traded any time. It's just going to be difficult to say. We've seen how the trade market and the free agent market has kind of dried up in a sense that there's not a lot of teams with money out there able to really do a whole lot, and it's kind of clogged up. So unless a team comes with a perfect deal that works for both sides, that's not overly complicated, we very well could see this drag on here a little bit longer. I mean, obviously teams like Winnipeg, I know, would use Dumba. There was a lot of rumors about them early on, but they don't have that top six center available that the Wild are going to want in return. There was links to Vancouver. I know before everything kind of happened there with Ekman-Larsson, there was rumors about them going after Dumba. Then that wasn't going to work. Then they were going after Ekman-Larsson. But you know what? At the end of the day, if the Wild want a top player out of Vancouver, they're probably looking for Brock Besser. Didn't seem like something they were interested in. They don't really have a top center to trade either, because obviously they're not going to want to trade Pettersson or Horvat. So there's not really going to be a deal there either. Some think that right now the Florida Panthers might be a leading contender. They've also been mentioned in the Patrick Laine sweepstakes, maybe willing to move Aaron Ekblad. So if they do trade Ekblad, it would be a good landing spot for Dumba to be the top right shot defenseman down there. So there's a possibility there, but at the end of the day, they're still very, very likely to be traded sometime before next season. He's a player that they would likely move for expansion draft purposes as well, because they can't protect all those defensemen and forwards, and they're going to be at risk to lose a really good player. So they will likely trade him when the deal that they need comes along, and if it doesn't happen now, they'll continue to look for it throughout the season. He could be a prime trade candidate at the deadline if the Wild are out of the playoffs, which very well could be the case. And if not, then look for him to be moved before the expansion draft next offseason. But it's bound to happen at some point, just a matter of when that right deal comes along. And when it comes to the Arizona Coyotes, it's a good possibility that we might see them take the roster they hold today into the regular season and actually not make too many more moves. Obviously, they are open for business still. There's still lots of players that were mentioned that they'd be open to trading, like goalie Darcy Kuemper. We're also looking at like Antti Ranta, even to a degree, was available. Derek Stepan, Nick Schmaltz, for example, Goligoski. But at this point, they just never got the kind of offers they were hoping to get on these players to move them. Before we saw kind of everything kind of get clogged up here and a lot of roster spots basically filled and teams just not having the money and tightness to kind of really be restricted on what they can do here for moves. So obviously in the case of Darcy Kuemper, it's certainly a case where they saw an opportunity to probably sell high on a goalie who's been, really, really solid and making a really fair contract. But at this point, the goalie market's been pretty much settled. So I wouldn't say completely to rule out the chance that they wouldn't make additional trades. But at this point, it's going to be tougher to do given where all the other teams around the league are at. And it is quite possible this team might be relatively quiet between now and the time that training camps get underway. But if that's the case, and I would fully suspect the Coyotes to be a team who could be very, very busy during the season, based on how they finished and where their things are at with the roster, hard to say exactly how competitive they're going to be next year. They still might be able to pick up where they left off last year and have a decent amount of success, but I mean, with all the rumors surrounding their captain, Ekman-Larsson, and Kuemper and all the rest, it's hard to say how much of a distraction that's going to be. And if they're not performing at a higher level, then I would imagine that during the next season, we could see a lot of trades by the time the season starts up to the deadline, because a lot of those players that I mentioned especially would be great rentals for other teams making playoff runs. So we'll see if we get any more details, but pretty good chance the Coyotes are pretty quiet over the next few months. So those are all your latest updates for today. Let me know your thoughts and everything discussed down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.